Hey guys, it's summer. You know what it means. Finally get some rest, chill out, and do the things you want in life. Wait a second. What? Challenge? Right now? Intigriti? Whatever. Cue the intro. So this is Intigriti's July Access Challenge by Romy.
Vromy.
Anyways, we scroll down, click on the challenge page, and we have it open. Now we can get ready to work and start. So when we look at the page, we can click on the names and stuff and see that it doesn't actually provide that much functionality. But when we click on archives, we see an interesting URL. And because of the fact we are such great hackers, we already can assume that this might be some SQL injection here, because when we enter something like true, we get a different query, and when we enter something like, I don't know, just bam, something on our keyboard, we get an error. What's quite strange, right? So when we enter false, maybe we get a different result. No, we get the same result. But when we enter something like this, we get a really strange result. So with the limit, we actually see that we can influence the output. And now we can assume that the query in the backend actually looks something like this. Probably not the same, but pretty similar. Okay, but what can we do with that now? Because we already know that this is an XSS challenge, we can probably assume that we have to insert our own data in some sort of way. The best way of doing this would be an SQL injection that would use the union operator, figure out the amount of columns, and inject itself into the right column so we can get our XSS working. But how do we do that? So now we have multiple options. We can either use a tool like SQLmap to figure out the union-based SQL injection, or we can try it ourselves. It's not even that hard. So by using this payload, we can actually figure out the amount of columns and which columns are injectable. Let's try it. So based on this payload and on the output, we can now assume that we have probably more than 2 columns. So it will probably be something around 4 columns that we have to inject, maybe in 5. So let's try it with this payload. Nice! Now we can see that we basically can inject our own stuff into the page. Now we can try to do some crazy JavaScript. Let's try it with this payload. Bam! And it won't get reflected properly. That's weird. So let's look at the source code and see what it's doing. So we can be sure that there is some sort of filter in the background that will probably just filter out our evil JavaScript and just inject it as text, so it won't fire. Interesting. But there's one thing about the post that looks strange. Can you see it? Right, it's the name. The name is basically just used or queried by the number, by the user ID probably in the background. So what if we have to use an SQL injection inside another SQL injection? So basically an SQL inception. Let's try it. So let's assume the user table looks something like this, right? We have our username and then maybe the last name of the user or profile image, whatever, right? So I have 3 columns. With that information, we can create an additional union-based SQL injection, and we can place it now on the 3rd column of our first SQL injection. You still here? Good. So we now take this and enter it here, and let's see what happens. But before we do this, we have to encode it specifically before we send it, because otherwise the backend, so the SQL server, won't be able to understand our query at all. So let's do this beforehand. There are multiple ways of doing this. Web has its own feature built in, so we can use this. And there are also multiple online tools for doing this. So the only thing you have to do is find the right tool and never do it by hand, because otherwise you will probably burn out. So let's encode it and send it to the server and see what happens. Interesting. So it seems like our payload is working and our SQL injection is also working, because we get no error. And let's try to inject something. So let's try to use our concat again to inject some stuff. But how can we now add something to the name, or basically change the name to whatever we want? Let's try it with this payload. Let's query a certain user or a user ID that doesn't exist, and basically union our own information to it, right? So the information that's being used will be our own information. With concat we can now add our own string and change the stuff that we want to add. Let's try this payload and it works, nice. We can now see our text displayed on the website in the user field. That's great, because we can assume that this field will probably not be escaped properly. So let's add our own JavaScript and our custom XSS payload, and let's try if that works and we can finally finish this challenge. As you can see, we can't really pop our XSS. Let's look at the console and maybe see what happens, because it's reflected properly as we can see here. But the CSP of the website won't allow us to execute our JavaScript. So before we actually tamper with the CSP, what is CSP? CSP basically stands for Content Security Policy, and basically means that our JavaScript should be loaded only from trusted sources that are defined in the CSP header of the website, or the part of the HTTP request. Let's look at the CSP of this website and see how we might be able to actually evade it. In order to find out how we can evade the CSP, we have to evaluate it, and there are great tools online. So we go to our most favorite search engine,
Bing, bing.
search for CSP evaluator, and we click on probably the first link because it's the best one, and we just enter the URL of the challenge. There we can see that different options are actually available that shouldn't be. For example, the option that Google or Cloudflare endpoints are allowed, which allow certain CSP evasion tactics to be used. So let's see which one would be the best. And because of the fact that I've used Google APIs in the past for those kind of problems, we can use the Google APIs JSONP endpoint to evade this filter. What we now have to do is basically Google for a certain payload that would work, and we'll just try it. So let's open up our most favorite search engine and search for this payload. What I can recommend is Brute XSS resource materials. There is a huge list of CSP evasion techniques, and there's even our payload that we want to use. So let's pick it, enter it in our SQL injection, and run it. Nice, our payload worked. We finally got this domain actually reflected on this XSS challenge, and we can now finally get some well-deserved rest. Hey guys, it's me again. I hope you really liked the video. Please like and subscribe if you want to see more content. And thanks again to Intigriti and Romy for the challenge. It was amazing. The SQL injection combined with XSS was a nice feature. And yeah, I'll see you guys again in the next video. Bye!